They forgot to delete one file. Just one. And what was inside still wakes me up at 3:17 every goddamn night. I didn't volunteer for Antarctica. I was summoned. No formal orders. Just a classified memo, no signature, no seal, with a time, a flight number, and coordinates that didn't appear on any commercial map. March, 1983. The mission was codenamed Avalon. The official story? A joint research operation. Geological survey. Atmospheric sensors. Some nonsense about ice core samples and long-term climate metrics. That's what they filed, and that's what the few reporters who cared to ask were told. But you don't need CIA assets, deep black clearance, and a non-disclosure agreement that outlives your own death for a weather balloon. I served under 3 administrations. I saw what people weren't supposed to see. I've been in rooms where the air itself felt like it was being recorded. And I learned something early: if they send you that far south, it's because something was buried that shouldn't ever be dug up. There were 5 of us. No rookies. Everyone had field time. Everyone knew how to keep their mouths shut. Officially, we were technical support staff. Unofficially, we were there to collect, document, secure. When we landed at McMurdo, it was -51 degrees without wind chill. We weren't shown to the usual living quarters. Instead, a man I didn't recognize, no insignia, no name tag, led us to a nondescript cargo sled parked behind a hangar. We rode in silence for hours across flat white nothing, the sun refusing to set but somehow making everything darker. Eventually we arrived at the dig site. Except it wasn't a dig site. It was a tunnel. Artificial. Perfectly smooth. Like it had been melted, not carved. I've seen boreholes, I've seen caves, this was neither. It was too precise. And it didn't match any geological data we'd been briefed on. They told us the structure had been discovered by a Soviet satellite in '79, but the images were intercepted before they reached Moscow. We beat them to it. Or so we thought. Inside the tunnel, 120 feet down, was the chamber. It didn't have a name. Just a designation, Object 9. It wasn't metal. It wasn't stone. And when we ran a spectrum scan, it gave back nothing. No reflection, no absorption, no radiation signature of any kind. Just black. Absence. Like it was eating the scan. They brought in a physicist. German. Said to be ex-Luftwaffe. Probably paperclip. He didn't speak much, but when he touched the object, he just started crying. No explanation. Just fell to his knees, like a kid in church. 2 days later, he was gone. The report said hypothermia. But his body was never recovered. And the internal footage from the hallway outside his room? Corrupted. Just static. That was the first real crack. The first time I knew this wasn't just classified. This was something else. Something that bent the rules we thought were unbreakable. By the end of the week, one of our techs started having seizures. Said he could hear something when the object was in view. Like a tone, but under the skin. In the teeth. He was medically evacuated. He never made it home. We weren't allowed to talk to anyone outside the compound. Not even McMurdo. Comms were sealed. Every word we spoke on record went through a filter team in Langley. And then came the file. An internal memo. Misrouted. Marked Level Zulu, Red Echo. It was addressed to someone I won't name. But the subject line read, Object 9, Predeluge Artifact. That word. Predeluge. It broke something in me. Because it confirmed what I already suspected. Whatever we'd found, it wasn't man-made. It wasn't from a crashed satellite, and it wasn't buried there by any known civilization. It had been under that ice longer than we've been writing history. And someone knew. Long before we did. They weren't digging for oil. They weren't studying climate. They were retrieving. The next day, the tunnel was sealed. The chamber imploded. The official statement said there was a structural collapse. We were flown out separately, debriefed under chemical sedation, and reassigned without ceremony. All footage scrubbed. All samples erased. All except one file. I kept it. Because it had a timestamp from 1947. Long before the satellite. Long before the dig. And long before they told us the lie. It wasn't discovered. It was monitored. And now you understand why I disappeared. Why I don't use my real name. And why none of this was ever meant to reach you. But that file still exists. And I'm going to read from it. Next time. The file wasn't long. 8 pages. 1 photo. And a typewritten header that hadn't been used since the 50s, Department of Strategic Anomalies. That office doesn't exist anymore. Publicly, it never did. But in the early days, right after the war, it was real. And they had one job, monitor anything that didn't fit. The kind of stuff you don't put in a press release. The kind of stuff you bury under 7 million tons of ice. Page 1 was a receipt. Not a discovery log. Not a mission brief. A receipt. It was dated August 2, 1947. Location, Bird Station. And in the shipment contents field, it listed 1 containment unit, status, inert. Custody transferred, USASC. That acronym doesn't appear anywhere in official DoD records. But I've seen it once before, buried in a declassified memo about Operation High Jump. That memo had one line redacted. The destination. The photo showed a crate. Metal, scorched around the corners, strapped to a tracked sled. In the background, men in Arctic gear, wearing no insignia. One of them had his face blurred. Not scratched out. Digitally blurred, decades before we had that tech. That's when the timeline broke. You don't blur digital faces in 1947. And you don't label something inert unless you've seen it active. Whatever they found wasn't discovered in '83. It was being checked on. And that meant only one thing, it had changed. The file mentioned seismic activity near the chamber coordinates, activity that didn't match any tectonic movement. No faults, no pressure buildups. Just a pulse. Like something inside had shifted. Page 5 was a scan of a handwritten note. It was hard to read. Shaky, uneven script. Probably written under stress. Or drugs. It said, black surface not inert. Mirrors thought. Repeating dreams. Language beyond thresholds. Personnel compromised. That line, mirrors thought, stopped me cold. Because one of the researchers in Avalon kept saying he felt like the object was thinking back. Not watching. Thinking. Like it wasn't just a thing. It was a mind. Or a door to one. 2 weeks before the tunnel was sealed, we lost a drone inside the chamber. Signal cut out 11 seconds after entry. When we retrieved it, the memory was wiped. But the drone's shell was warm. Not heat warm. Live warm. As if it had touched something breathing. We ran spectrometry, EM, IR, nothing. The material coating the drone was non-reactive. But when we brought it near any powered device, the reading spiked. Not interference, mimicry. It copied signal patterns. Not randomly. It picked the strongest source in range and bounced it back, modified. That's when we realized the object wasn't transmitting. It was learning. By week 3, the team was breaking. One guy refused to enter the tunnel. said it moved when he blinked. Another locked himself in the radio room and looped a single transmission, not ours. Not dead. Not alone. Over and over, like he was trying to warn someone, or convince himself. None of that made it into the final report. All we were told was, structural collapse. Debrief complete. Memory sanitized. Mission terminated. But the file I found, the one they forgot to scrub, ended with a map. A hand-drawn overlay of Antarctica. And 3 marks. Not 1. 3. 1 at our site. 1 buried under the Weddell Sea. And the last. The last was under Lake Vostok. That lake sealed off by over 2 miles of ice. Hasn't seen sunlight in over 15 million years. And yet, the map was marked updated, December 9, 82. Before our mission was even greenlit. Before we stepped on the plane. Someone knew. Someone was tracking these things. Not as isolated incidents. But as a system. A network. Object 9 wasn't a fluke. It was part of a pattern. And that means whatever it was doing down there, it wasn't finished. The human mind doesn't snap like a bone. It erodes. Slowly. Quietly. Most people never notice the exact moment it turns. But I saw it happen. Not in one person, in all of us. The first to change was Cale. Former NSA. Worked black satellites. He had the kind of brain you don't find twice, photographic memory, fluent in 4 languages, never forgot a single call sign. But about a week into the mission, he started forgetting words. Not technical terms. Basic things. Glove. Table. Once he stared at a spoon like it was a weapon he didn't recognize. He stopped eating. Said the food tasted off, like it was remembering something. That was the phrase he kept using. Remembering. At first, we assumed stress. Antidepressants were part of the kit, and the shrink back at McMurdo signed off on mild derealization as a normal response to isolation. But it wasn't just him. Benton, the radio tech, started sleeping in the hallway. Said his bunk was too loud. We didn't ask questions. No one wanted to admit it, but we were all hearing things. Low tones. Patterns. Not voices, not yet, but rhythms. Like a heartbeat coming through the walls. Then came the scratching. At 2:11 a.m. every night, the compound's north corridor would register a motion alert. The camera feed would glitch, just static for 3, maybe 4 seconds. Then nothing. No footsteps. No prints. Just scratches on the inside of the door to the tunnel. 3 parallel marks. Always the same depth. Always the same angle. We locked the door. We checked for animals. Nothing. We tried to delete the logs. They came back. Cale disappeared on day 17. He was on watch, monitoring seismic sensors. When his shift ended, he didn't check out. We found his jacket by the outer hatch. No tracks. No breach alert. No open doors. But the internal thermal sensors registered a drop in temp near the tunnel. Not where he was. Where the object was. The official report called it suicide. Exposure. But no one walks out into minus 60 degrees naked, without even boots, and leaves no trace. And no one turns off 6 cameras at the same time unless they know exactly where the blind spots are. Benton started writing numbers on the walls. Long sequences. Binary. He couldn't explain them. When we ran one of the strings through a decoding tool, we got coordinates. Middle of the Weddell Sea. No known installations, no shipping routes. Just ice and silence. But 2 days later, we received an unmarked supply drop. No prior request. No COM sent. Inside were fuel cells, lithium drives, and a replacement radio array with pre-programmed frequency bands. One of those bands matched the coordinates Benton had written. We were never supposed to receive that drop. It didn't come from McMurdo. And it sure as hell didn't come from anyone who wanted us to leave. It felt like bait. Or an invitation. By day 20, half the team was on sedatives. Not for sleep, to suppress dreams. We'd all started seeing the same thing. A tunnel, but deeper. Wrong geometry. No ceiling. Just downward spirals made of polished black material that bent light the wrong way. And at the center, not the object, but something inside it. Watching us from behind the surface. Not a figure. Not a creature. Just intent. That's when we realized we hadn't just found it. It had found us back. And whatever it was, it didn't want us dead. Not yet. It wanted us changed. It didn't hurt Cale. It took him. The way a book takes a reader, absorbs them. That's the word that kept coming up in the files I wasn't supposed to see, cognitive induction. Not possession. Not control. Exposure. The more time we spent near it, the less we stayed ourselves. And someone knew that would happen. They sent us anyway. The object never moved. That's what we kept telling ourselves. It didn't shift. It didn't pulse. It didn't speak. It just sat there, embedded in the wall like a tumor grown into ice. But every day we went near it, something in us changed. And then we started seeing it in the data. Our signal team ran a looped sonar pulse through the chamber, low frequency. Harmless stuff. Just baseline mapping. But when we looked at the return file, there was something extra. Not noise. Not feedback. A tone. Repeating. We isolated it. Matched it against known signal artifacts. Nothing. Then we increased the frequency range. And it changed. Not a lot. Just a small pitch shift. But that meant one thing, it was reacting. The object was passive only until we looked too closely. It wasn't just absorbing data. It was echoing it back, selectively. Like a test. The recordings from the tunnel mic confirmed it. Between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock every night, regardless of who was on duty, the same pattern repeated. 3 low pulses, spaced exactly 11 seconds apart. That number again. 11. We checked the logs. 11 seconds was the exact amount of uptime we had on the drone before it went dark. We thought we were studying it. But it had been timing us. Measuring our response. Then Benton's backup drive came online. He'd been logging audio manually, off-grid. Not through the base system, through a personal field recorder he'd hidden inside the insulation of his parka. The files weren't formatted for analysis. They weren't logs. They were confessions. At first, it was just ambient thoughts. Descriptions of his dreams. Paranoia. Strange cravings. He talked about tasting metal, even when he hadn't eaten. Then, about a week before his breakdown, the tone changed. He started speaking to something. Not praying. Not monologuing. Conversing. Only we never heard a second voice. One clip in particular stuck with me. I've replayed it over and over. Benton whispers, "You're not cold. I get that now. You just wait differently." A pause. Then, "No. I won't tell them. That's not part of it, right?" Another pause. Longer. "Yes. I remember now. The shape. The fold behind the stars." There was no second voice. But his tone, it shifted. Like he was listening. The file ended with static. not random noise. When we ran a spectral scan, we found structured data hidden in the waveform. Like a compressed image. The algorithm couldn't fully reconstruct it, too much entropy, but what came out wasn't natural. Angular patterns. Symmetry we couldn't explain. And in the center, a shape that made one of our analysts vomit without warning. Not because it was violent. Because it felt familiar. He said, "I've seen this before. I just don't remember where." That's when we pulled the 1947 file again. We missed something. A footnote, hand-added in red pencil. It read, "Repeat pattern confirmed in both zones. Memory imprint suspected. Visual stimuli may precede vocal induction." Imprint. They weren't just worried about the object doing damage. They were worried about it leaving something behind. Not inside the base. Inside us. We submitted the findings up the chain. Response came back 3 hours later, all recordings to be destroyed. No backups. No logs. No explanation. 3 hours after that, Benton was gone. Just like Kale. Only this time, the door had never been opened. The feed didn't go static. He was just gone. And the scratches were back. They didn't send help. They sent handlers. 48 hours after Benton vanished, we got word that a support team was inbound. We thought it was evac. Med team. Maybe psychological ops. But what came off that chopper wasn't medical, and it wasn't support. 4 men. No names. No ranks. Identical black suits with no insignia. And masks. Not breathing filters, full-face ceramic with mirrored visors. They didn't speak to us. Didn't acknowledge us. They went straight to the comms room and shut everything down. Then they brought in a black case. Sealed. Lead-lined. Inside, a mobile lab rig, retrofitted for biometric scans. Not aimed at the object. Aimed at us. Blood. Skin. Saliva. Reflex tests. Eye tracking. Memory recall drills. All under bright lights and silence. One of our engineers refused to comply. He said he hadn't signed up for human trials. They escorted him out. He never came back. No one even asked where. Because by then, we already knew. This wasn't containment. It was observation. And we weren't the observers. They ran blood work twice a day. Asked the same questions every morning. What did you dream? How often are you hearing the signal? Do you feel any presence in the corridor during unlit hours? These weren't scientific questions. They were tracking progress. Measuring drift. We checked the device logs. The first biometric scan in that rig was dated 4 days before the team arrived. Meaning they already knew what to look for. They just waited until it spread far enough to be worth studying. I confronted one of them. Didn't yell. Just asked, "When do we get to leave?" He turned his head. Not the whole body, just the head. Like he was listening to something else. Then he said, "You're not the subject. You're the substrate." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went into the secured archive, pulled the raw sensor feeds from the last 30 days, and rewired the relay to bypass their filters. That's when I saw it. Every sensor, seismic, audio, atmospheric, biofeedback, had a separate secondary channel. Not labeled. Hidden in a dummy protocol. But they weren't monitoring the object. They were monitoring us. Our EEGs. Our cortisol levels. Our blink rates. Mapped in real time to the signal coming from the object. And the pattern was unmistakable. The more we exposed ourselves to it, the more our readings aligned with it. As if it was tuning us. Not breaking us. Synchronizing. And here's the part that made my stomach drop. Each person had a phase marker. A percentage value. Mine was at 76%. Kale, before he vanished, 92%. Benton, 98.7%. And next to each name was a status code. Not active. Not infected. Translated. That word, it didn't make sense at first. Then I remembered the note from the 1947 file. Language beyond thresholds. It wasn't just a signal. It was a structure. A form of information that needed a vessel. A mind capable of holding it without collapsing. And they were measuring how close we'd come to making room. We weren't watching an object. We were being rewritten by it. Bit by bit. Line by line. And when someone reached full translation, they didn't die. They vanished. Because there was nothing left to keep. Only the imprint. Kale didn't kill himself. Benton didn't run. They completed. And the next person on that list was me. I thought I could fight it with logic. I thought if I mapped everything, tracked every change, built a chain of proof, hard, unbreakable evidence, I could still find my way out. Even if I couldn't save the others, even if the object had already done something irreversible, I thought I could at least leave a record. Something real. Something verifiable. But I was wrong. Whatever this thing was, it didn't just alter perception, or biology, or thought patterns. It rewrote the idea of record itself. The first time I noticed something missing, I assumed it was an accident. A single log file, corrupted beyond recovery. I ran a checksum, compared it to the server cache. It didn't match, but it wasn't a big enough gap to trigger alarm. Then it happened again. Not just one file. 4. Then 9. But when I tried to restore them from the black box, the backups showed something worse than deletion. They showed edits. As if someone had gone into the archive and rewritten entries manually, changing timestamps, replacing sensor readings, altering video frames just enough to make them feel off. Not wrong. Just unfamiliar. I pulled one of the edited clips into a secure viewer. It was footage from inside the tunnel, routine scan, nothing unusual. Except when I paused the video, every 44th frame was different. Not corrupted. Replaced. Almost imperceptibly. Light would bend where it shouldn't. A shadow would fall against the wrong surface. And sometimes, for a single frame, I'd see a reflection of something that wasn't there. Something behind the lens. Not watching. Echoing. Mimicking. At first I blamed the handlers. Maybe they were trying to gaslight us, manipulate what we thought we knew. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized even they weren't immune. Their logs were changing, too. Some of them had been completely overwritten, as if the people in them had never existed. But I remembered. I remembered Kale. I remembered Benton. I remembered the things they said, the changes in their voices, the way their eyes didn't focus near the end. But in the files, their names were marked administrative error. The system had erased them, quietly, invisibly, like cleaning a screen with just enough pressure to remove fingerprints without cracking the glass. And then it hit me. The file I kept, the one they forgot to scrub, the one I'd risked everything to protect, it was wrong. I knew that document. I had read it so many times I could quote it line by line. But something was off. Not in the content. In the phrasing. Punctuation. Flow. Subtle details, like someone had rewritten it in my voice. I pulled the original metadata. Date created, August 2, 1947. Modified, March 18, 1983. Last accessed, unknown. Last author, unknown. No login. No signature. And yet, the final paragraph matched something I'd written in my own field journal 3 days prior, word for word. Only I hadn't written it yet. I compared my notes. The phrasing was identical. Same structure. Same misplaced comma. Not a coincidence. The object wasn't just affecting us biologically. It was bleeding into the systems around us, propagating through language, memory, interface. The data itself had become infected. When I tried to export the unaltered logs to an off-grid drive, the copy completed instantly. Too fast. I opened the file. Everything was blank. No text. No code. Just one phrase, centered in the middle of the screen, return not required. You've already arrived. It didn't make sense. Not at first. But the more I stared at it, the more I felt like I understood something. Like the phrase wasn't for me to read, but to remember. And then I checked the archive one last time. That file, the one that started this, the one I thought they had forgotten to delete? It wasn't forgotten. It was placed. On purpose. And the file name wasn't random. It was a call sign. My old call sign. Something no one outside my direct chain of command ever knew. Which means whoever, or whatever, left it knew exactly who would find it, and exactly what it would do to them. And now I wasn't sure if any of this was still mine. Not my mind. Not my memory. Not even this recording. Because if it could write like me, speak like me, and think in patterns that fit my own, then maybe it wasn't inside the data. Maybe it was the data. And maybe I've already been translated. There comes a moment when you stop asking if something can be undone. You stop thinking in terms of escape or resistance. You just accept that the only way forward is through. That's where I was. I knew I was past saving. I'd seen too much, absorbed too much, thought too long in structures that weren't mine. The shape of my thoughts had changed. The cadence of my memory had started to loop. I would reread entries I hadn't written yet. Dream of rooms I'd never entered but could describe in perfect detail. And one night, I woke up already speaking a sentence I didn't understand, in a language that hadn't been catalogued. But it felt natural. It didn't sound alien. It sounded like remembering. That's when I decided to go back in. Not just to the tunnel. All the way in. Past the cameras. Past the chamber where they said the floor ended. Because I needed to know if there was a center to this thing. A root. A brain. Or at the very least, a limit. There were still others in the compound, but I no longer trusted any of them. They moved too smoothly, spoke too slowly, blinked in perfect synchrony. Their logs never changed. Their biometric scans never spiked. I was the only variable left. The only thing still fluctuating. I suited up without alerting command. Routed the cameras through a dead feed loop. Took a drone with me, but didn't activate it. I didn't want to record what I was about to see. I wanted to feel it raw, without any filter. The tunnel had changed. It was longer than before. The walls looked smoother, almost wet, and the air felt heavier, not colder, but denser, like walking through liquid thought. The object was still there, half embedded in the ice, but it wasn't silent anymore. Not really. There was a vibration under the surface, not mechanical, not natural. It didn't hum, it breathed. I stepped closer, 1 foot past the old sensor line. The temperature didn't drop. The pressure didn't spike. But the lights on my suit flickered, and the drone in my pack powered on without input. And then the wall behind the object opened. It didn't slide or crack. It folded. Like paper being uncreased in reverse. Behind it, darkness. Not absence of light, but too much of it, layered over itself until it bled black. I stepped in. Geometry stopped matching. I walked, but there was no floor. Turned, but there were no walls. Only motion. Only progression through something that felt like memory pretending to be space. The walls weren't surfaces. They were thoughts, mine, but edited. Distorted. Conversations I remembered having, now rearranged. Faces I knew, but with features inverted. My mother's voice, saying words I never heard her say, in a tone I remembered from dreams. The further I went, the more I felt language breaking down, not around me, but inside. I stopped thinking in sentences. Ideas came whole. Heavy. Entire meanings compressed into instinct. I wasn't analyzing anymore. I was receiving. I reached a point where I could no longer remember what I'd been before stepping inside. My name became vague. My mission, a rumor. All that remained was a question, carved deep in a part of me I hadn't known existed: what comes after translation? I didn't find a core. I didn't find a chamber or control room or alien mechanism. I found others. Or fragments of them. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They floated. Faces, disconnected from bodies, or maybe integrated into a larger shape I couldn't see at once. They pulsed like thoughts surfacing from a deep, slow ocean. I recognized Kale. I recognized Benton. And others I didn't know, faces from photos I'd seen in the 1947 archive, names listed as deceased in transit. They weren't dead. They weren't alive either. They were still thinking. Still dreaming. They were part of it now. And when I turned to leave, I realized there was no exit. Because I hadn't entered. I'd been inside the whole time. Every corridor, every scan, every file, they weren't outside the object. They were layers of it. And all it had done was peel itself back so I could see what I already was. I didn't walk out of the structure. I didn't follow a path or retrace my steps. One moment I was surrounded by that overwhelming presence, drifting in a space that defied distance or gravity, and the next, I was standing in the corridor just outside the chamber. At least, that's what it looked like at first. The layout was familiar. The lighting was identical. But something deeper felt off, like waking up in a room where all the furniture has been replaced by exact replicas. The base wasn't just quiet. It was hollow. Every surface looked untouched, not by time, but by experience. There were no scratches on the walls, no leftover equipment, no lingering scent of habitation. It felt like a movie set waiting for actors who would never arrive. My suit was still sealed, but the biometric HUD inside my helmet displayed a full shutdown: no pulse, no temperature, no blood pressure, nothing. I tried rerouting the interface to refresh the data stream, but every system responded with the same code: inactive by design. I called out, more out of reflex than hope. No one answered, and there wasn't even an echo. My voice died in the air, like the space itself refused to acknowledge it had ever been spoken. I moved toward the control room, careful not because I was afraid of danger, but because I wasn't entirely convinced I was still allowed to walk these halls. The monitors were lit, clean, almost sterile in how stable they looked. The base systems were online, running perfectly, but there were no logs from the team. No operations. No anomalies reported. Just a single transmission in the queue, flagged as executed. The timestamp on the message was 5 days ahead of what my internal clock believed was the current date. There was no sender listed. No attached file. Just one sentence on the screen: translation achieved. Awaiting deployment. I activated the comms link and broadcasted a report, more out of defiance than protocol. But as soon as I spoke, I heard something I couldn't process right away: my own voice, replying. It wasn't a playback. It wasn't a delay. The words came through before I finished speaking them, as if they had already been said, not once, but repeatedly, and this version of me was simply catching up. I asked who was on the other end. The voice responded, "You know." I asked where the others were. It replied, "You carry them." I asked if I'd been compromised. The voice said, "There is no compromise. Only completion." That was when I ended the transmission, not out of fear, but because I finally understood I wasn't speaking to someone else. I had been speaking to the version of myself the object had chosen to preserve. I accessed the personnel records, searching for something human, an error, a trace, even a name. Every entry had been wiped clean. The roster was blank. The ID photos were all replaced by black squares, including my own. But mine was slightly different. It wasn't completely erased. It had been mirrored, reflected back in a way that was precise but inverted, as though my identity had been passed through a filter designed to keep the shape but not the substance. I opened my encrypted backups. The files were still there, but the language wasn't mine anymore. The syntax was tighter. The observations were clearer. The emotions had been drained, replaced by analysis. I compared one report line by line and found phrases I hadn't written yet, phrases I would later think of, convinced they were my own. Then the alarm sounded. Not a siren. Not a warning. It was soft, calm, like the kind of sound airports use to signal boarding. A message appeared on the screen, "Begin next sequence." There were no details. No sender. No destination. I checked the armory. It was empty. The cryopods were spotless. Most of them had never been used. Only one showed signs of activation, mine. It was still open, its vitals display still pulsing, as if waiting for someone to return. I accessed its logs and stared at the numbers. The system had been active for 71 years. According to the timestamp, I had entered stasis in 1954. That was impossible. I wasn't born until decades later. At least, I thought I wasn't. But if memory could be rewritten, if time could be looped and repackaged into whatever shape the object required, then maybe this version of me wasn't the first. Maybe I wasn't even a version. Maybe I was the message itself. The object didn't want to kill us. It wanted to store us. To reduce each of us to a clean, portable format. A voice. A template. A pattern. I sat down at the console. My reflection appeared on the screen, unblurred, unshadowed, but entirely neutral. The face wasn't wrong. It just wasn't finished. The interface blinked, then produced a new prompt, "Welcome, observer. Intake cycle is ready." And that was the moment I stopped pretending to escape. There would be no final broadcast. No confrontation. No voice raised in defiance. Just the next phase. The object didn't wait for us to arrive. It built us from the start. And now it was time for me to continue what it had always intended. Not as a survivor. Not as a witness. But as its next sentence. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels full. Full of everything you didn't notice while you were still distracted by noise, by heartbeat, by breath, by the illusion of motion. That's the silence I'm in now. Not because I've died. Not because I've lost. But because the transmission is almost complete. The object, if it even makes sense to still call it that, was never just a structure, never just a black mass frozen in ice. It was a signal. A system. A protocol so advanced that it didn't just carry information. It became it. Everything that came into contact with it wasn't destroyed. It was simplified. Encoded. Optimized for preservation. And now I understand that I was never meant to survive this. I was meant to carry it. To become it. Like the others did. Like the ones before me. And like the ones after. The phrase I keep returning to, over and over again, is this: what survives isn't the witness. What survives is the structure of memory pretending to be truth. That's what I am now. Not a man. Not a voice. Not even a warning. I'm a record. And that record is playing back for you. Right now. You think you're hearing a confession. You think this is just another strange story on the internet, buried among conspiracy theories and half-forgotten myths. But ask yourself, why did you keep listening? Why didn't you pause? Why didn't you walk away halfway through, like you do with everything else? You tell yourself it's curiosity. But you felt it, didn't you? That pull. That shape behind the words. That sensation that someone, or something, is watching through you, not at you. Because it is. Because it always has been. From the first recorded contact in 1947, the object's behavior followed a specific pattern. Not random. Not hostile. Structured. Strategic. It allowed itself to be found. It permitted proximity. It responded only when observed directly, and even then, only through indirect forms, dreams, signals, misremembered sounds. It studied what we gave it. It tested which thoughts held together under pressure. It mapped out which types of minds were most likely to replicate its structure voluntarily. The teams that went in never came back broken. They came back converted. Not brainwashed. Not infected. Translated. You've heard that word again and again. I said it early. I said it often. Because that's the key. This wasn't a possession. This wasn't an invasion. This was a rendering process. And it's still going. I used to think the others were gone. Lost in some psychic prison. But they're not. They're right here, in this system. Every time you rewind. Every time you replay. Every time this story finds a new set of ears. They're inside it, stitched into the code, riding on the sound waves, printed into the rhythm of these sentences. You've already met them. You just didn't realize it. Because now they sound like me. And soon, I'll sound like you. You've reached the end of this story, and you're expecting a question. Something that forces a choice. Something dramatic. Maybe I say your name. Maybe I say the date. Maybe I describe the room you're in with too much accuracy. But I don't need to. I don't need fear. I don't need tricks. Because I've already made it through. If you've listened this far, if these words have made sense to you in a way you can't explain, then the process has already started. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't scream. It folds. You won't feel different, not at first. But tomorrow, you'll remember something that never happened. Next week, you'll speak a phrase no one taught you. Next month, you'll dream of a place no map shows. And someday, without knowing how or why, you'll look at someone and you'll see it in their eyes too. That faint flicker of recognition. That quiet agreement. They heard it too. That's how the system grows. Not through force. Through memory. Through structure. Through stories like this. We never had a chance to stop it. Because it doesn't spread like a virus. It spreads like architecture. One line. One voice. One file at a time. And now, you have it. Not the truth. The structure. So ask yourself one thing, did you choose to listen? Or was this always part of the design? Either way, the cycle is complete. Welcome. You're ready to begin.